A woman in her 60s sits at a mahogany desk in a townhouse off Fifth Avenue, and on that desk is a single coin. Not a stock certificate, not a laptop showing a trading app. A coin, dull gold, worn smooth at the edges from having passed through more hands than she'll ever know. Her grandfather bought it in 1968. Her father never sold it. And in the last year, while half of Wall Street was chasing the next hot ticker, that coin quietly outperformed almost everything else in the market. This is the story of what old money actually does with its wealth, and why the families who've kept it for generations were never impressed by the assets everyone else was chasing. If you're new here, this channel is about the habits, the instincts, and the quiet decisions that separate lasting wealth from wealth that disappears in a single bad decade. Subscribe if that's the kind of thing you want to understand. Here's what nobody at the dinner parties wants to say out loud. The people with the oldest money in the room are almost never the ones talking about their portfolios. In new money circles, there's a kind of performance to investing. The crypto wallet mentioned casually over cocktails, the stock tip whispered like a secret handshake. But old money families learned something generations ago that new money is only now rediscovering the hard way. Performance chasing is a young habit. Preservation is an old one. Picture a drawing room in London, heavy curtains, a fire that's been lit in that same hearth for 150 years. The family that owns it has survived 2 world wars, a depression, and more market panics than anyone can count on 2 hands. Ask them what they hold, and you won't hear the name of a hot tech company. You'll hear about land, about art, and you'll hear, if they trust you enough to say it plainly, about gold. It sounds almost old-fashioned, doesn't it? In a world of algorithmic trading and apps that let you buy fractional shares of anything in 3 seconds, the idea of holding a physical metal feels like something from another century. And yet, that's exactly the point old money has always understood, and new money keeps having to learn the hard way. The assets that last longest are rarely the ones that feel most exciting in the moment. Because here's the tension nobody tells you about when you're chasing returns. The families who've kept wealth intact for 100 years or more didn't do it by finding the single best performing asset of any given year. They did it by owning the asset that nobody could take away from them, inflate away from them, or panic them out of at the worst possible moment. And in 2026, that asset has quietly done something almost nobody predicted. It didn't just hold steady while other assets wobbled. It became the best performing major asset class of the past 2 years running, climbing to prices that would have sounded absurd even a few years ago. Central banks around the world started buying it in record volumes. Institutional money that had ignored it for a decade suddenly couldn't get enough. And the families who never stopped holding it, the ones who kept a coin on a desk instead of a login screen on a phone, didn't need to react to any of it. They already had what everyone else was scrambling to buy. But understanding why this happened and why old money never panicked in the first place means going back to a lesson most people never get taught. The lesson starts with a question that sounds almost too simple. What actually happens to money when nobody's watching? Not the money in a checking account, earning almost nothing while inflation quietly eats into it year after year. Not the money in a portfolio built entirely on the assumption that markets always eventually go up. The question old money asks is different. It's what happens to wealth across decades, across currency changes, across governments that rise and collapse, across the kind of long, slow erosion that never makes headlines because it happens 1 percentage point at a time. Most people have never had to think this way because most people have never had to protect wealth across more than 1 generation. But the families who have, the ones with townhouses that have been in the family since before income tax existed, the ones whose art collections were assembled by great-grandparents, learned something the rest of us are only starting to grasp. Paper promises fail. Currencies get devalued. Companies that seemed unshakable become footnotes. But certain physical assets, scarce by nature and impossible to print more of, have a way of surviving everything thrown at them. Think about a dinner in Milan, the kind where the conversation moves fluidly between 4 languages and nobody's phone is ever visible on the table. At some point, if you listen closely enough, someone will mention the metal. Not gold, not bullion, just the metal, the way you'd refer to something so foundational it doesn't need its full name. It's mentioned the way you'd mention the family's insurance policy. Unremarkable, assumed, a given, not a gamble. That's the emotional distance old money keeps from its most important holdings, and it's the opposite of how most new investors behave. New money watches the ticker. Old money barely remembers where the safe deposit box is because they're not checking it every day. They're not trying to time an exit. They bought it as insurance against everything else going wrong, and insurance isn't something you obsess over. It's something you're simply glad to have when the storm hits. And in 2026, the storm did hit. Inflation refused to fully cool. Currency uncertainty spread from one region to the next. Geopolitical tension flared in places that hadn't been on anyone's radar a year earlier. The kind of environment that makes new money investors check their portfolios 6 times a day made old money families do almost nothing at all because the asset they'd been quietly holding for that exact scenario had already done its job. Gold surged past levels that would have seemed implausible not long before, driven by exactly the kind of uncertainty old families have always been positioning against. Record buying from central banks, a weakening confidence in currency stability, and a wave of institutional capital finally catching up to what old wealth understood instinctively. Here's what makes this different from a hot stock. Tip, though, and it's the part that separates families who keep their wealth from families who lose it within 2 generations. Nobody at that Milanese dinner table is telling you to put everything into it. That's not how old money thinks. The instinct isn't concentration, it's proportion. A measured allocation, sized carefully, sitting quietly in the background of a much larger picture. Not because it's thrilling, but because it's the piece of the puzzle that doesn't move when everything else does. And this is where most people, even smart people, get the whole philosophy backwards. They think the goal of an asset like this is to make them rich. It was never designed to do that. It was designed to make sure that when everything else goes wrong, when the market corrects, when a currency wobbles, when the unexpected finally arrives, and it always eventually does, there's a floor beneath the family that nobody and nothing can take away. But there's a second layer to this that almost nobody outside these circles ever gets access to, and it has less to do with the asset itself than with the way old money families make decisions about it in the first place. The way old money makes decisions is almost the exact inverse of how everyone else was taught to invest, and it starts with a story a friend once told me about her grandmother, a woman who'd grown up between Paris and Buenos Aires and had outlived 3 currencies, 2 coups, and 1 hyperinflation crisis that wiped out most of her neighbors' savings entirely. Her grandmother never called herself an investor. She called herself careful. And carefulness, it turned out, looked nothing like the frantic energy of a trading floor. It looked like patience so deep it bordered on indifference. When the markets were euphoric, she didn't chase the euphoria. When everyone around her was panic selling, she didn't panic. She simply held what she decided years earlier was worth holding, and let time do what time does to assets that are actually built to last. This is the part that trips people up, especially people who are newly wealthy and eager to prove it. They think sophistication means constant activity, checking the portfolio, adjusting the allocation, chasing whatever asset just had a headline-grabbing quarter. But real sophistication, the kind you find in families who've done this for 4 or 5 generations, looks almost boring from the outside. It looks like a coin sitting untouched in a drawer for 30 years. It looks like a decision made once carefully and then simply left alone. And there's a reason for that stillness, one that goes beyond simple patience. Old money families have watched what happens to the families who don't have this instinct. They've watched cousins, neighbors, entire branches of extended families burn through fortunes in a single generation because nobody taught them the difference between an asset that grows your wealth and an asset that protects it. Those are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the fastest ways to lose everything a family spent a century building. Think about the couple at a Hamptons gala, the kind of event where every conversation is a performance and every outfit is a small announcement. You can usually tell within about 90 seconds which kind of wealth you're talking to. New money wants you to know what they own. Old money would rather talk about anything else. The wine, the weather, the ridiculous traffic getting out to the island. Because the wealth itself was never meant to be the conversation. It was meant to simply exist in the background, doing its quiet work, while the family got to live their actual lives. That's the real difference this year has exposed, more clearly than almost any year before it. The families holding the asset that just had its best 2-year run in recent memory aren't out there celebrating. They're not posting about it. Most of them probably haven't even checked the current price because checking the price was never the point. The point was always what it represents. A hedge against the exact kind of uncertainty that 2026 delivered in waves, a piece of the portfolio that does its job precisely when everything else stops doing its job. And a reminder that the oldest wealth in the world has always been built less on brilliance than on restraint. And restraint, it turns out, is a skill. It's not something you're born with. It's something you learn usually by watching people who already have it. the way you'd learn table manners or the right way to greet someone twice your age at a formal dinner. It's a kind of fluency, an instinct for what to hold, what to ignore, and when silence says more than any headline ever could. That same fluency shows up in something most people overlook entirely, the room itself, and how a person carries themselves through it. It's rarely the paintings on the wall or the size of the drawing room that gives old money away. It's the way certain people read a space before they even open their mouths, the way they know, without thinking, whether a moment calls for stillness or warmth, when to speak, and when the silence is doing more work than words ever could. That instinct, the ability to move through elite rooms without ever seeming to try, isn't luck. It's a skill the families around that Milan dinner table learned the same way they learned about the metal in the safe. Quietly, deliberately, over years. If you want to understand that skill in more depth, I put together a guide called Social Intelligence that breaks down exactly how these instincts work, the unspoken cues that separate the people who belong from the people who are performing belonging. I'll leave the link in the description for anyone who wants to go deeper, because here's what's easy to miss when you're only looking at the numbers. The people who benefited most from gold's run this year weren't the ones who discovered it in January when the headlines started. They were the ones who'd already decided decades earlier that certain things don't need explaining, don't need timing, and don't need a headline to justify holding onto them. That grandmother in Buenos Aires never once mentioned percentages. She talked about her grandchildren, about the garden, about a recipe for something involving quince that nobody else in the family could ever get quite right. The wealth was simply there, doing what it was built to do, while the actual living happened in the foreground. And maybe that's the real inheritance old money passes down. Not the coin itself, not the number in an account somewhere, but the instinct to stop mistaking excitement for wisdom. Every year brings some asset that everyone's suddenly talking about, some chart that gets passed around group chats, some headline promising the next great multiplier. Old money has watched 100 of those come and go. What they've held onto instead is far less thrilling and far more durable. The understanding that true wealth isn't measured by how fast it grows in a single dazzling year, but by how quietly it survives the years nobody saw coming. Because eventually the year always comes. The one nobody predicted. The currency wobble, the geopolitical shock, the crisis that makes everyone else reach for their phones and check their portfolios in a panic. And when that year comes, the families who never needed to react are the ones sitting exactly where they have always been. At that same mahogany desk, in that same townhouse, with the same worn coin catching the light.